I stole a beer bottle to prove I wasn't the father. The results destroyed my family. The envelope didn't arrive by mail. It was waiting for me on the mahogany dining table in my parents' house, sitting right next to the Sunday pot roast like a side dish no one had ordered. I just walked in, shaking the rain off my coat, expecting the usual lecture about why I was 32 and still unmarried. Instead, I walked into an ambush. My mother was dabbing her eyes with a napkin. My father was staring at his plate, jaw tight. My older sister, Sarah, was pacing the room with the righteous energy of a prosecutor who just found the smoking gun. And sitting in the corner, looking small and fragile in a cardigan that was definitely too modest for her usual style, was Qley. I hadn't seen Qley in 6 years. We had dated for 3 months in my mid-20s. A chaotic, fun, but ultimately shallow rebound relationship that ended when I realized she treated credit card limits like suggestions. "Sit down, Mark," my father said. It wasn't a request. I sat. "What's going on?" "Hi, Qley." Qley didn't look at me. She looked at Sarah. "Tell him," Sarah commanded. She was standing behind her husband, Greg. Greg was leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, wearing that smug, half-bored expression he always wore when he felt superior. He was a VP at a logistics firm, the kind of guy who drove a Tesla and made sure you knew he drove a Tesla. "Mark," my mother said, her voice trembling. Qley has a son, Leo. He's 5 years old." I did the math. 5 years old, plus 9 months. That landed squarely in the window we were together. My stomach did a slow roll. "Okay," I said cautiously. "He's yours, Mark?" Qley whispered, finally looking up. Her eyes were wet. "I didn't want to tell you. I thought I could do it on my own. But things have gotten hard. He deserves to know his father. He deserves support." Silence. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating. "I used protection," I said. "Every time. Nothing is 100%, Sarah snapped. "God, Mark, don't be that guy. Don't be the deadbeat who denies his own flesh and blood. Look at the pictures." She slid a manila folder across the table. I opened it. A boy with sandy blonde hair and a gap-toothed smile. He was cute. He had a square jaw. My jaw is square. But so are a million other guys' jaws. "He looks exactly like you," my mom sniffled. "Oh, Mark. A grandson. We missed 5 years of his life." "I want a paternity test," I said. The room exploded. "How dare you?" Sarah yelled. "She comes here, pours her heart out, admits she's struggling, and you insult her integrity? She's not asking for millions, Mark. She just wants help with school and rent." "It's standard procedure," I said, looking at Greg. "Greg, you're a businessman. You wouldn't sign a contract without due diligence, right?" Greg chuckled. A low, condescending sound. "This isn't business, Mark. It's family. But honestly, if it were me, I'd step up. That's what men do. We take responsibility for our actions. Even the accidental ones." He put a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "We've already discussed it. If you're not going to man up, we will. We're not letting that boy starve because his father is too selfish to admit a mistake. We're prepared to help Qley legally establish paternity if you refuse to sign the voluntary acknowledgement," my father added, his voice grim. "Don't force us to drag our own son to court." I looked at Qley. She was studying the tablecloth, avoiding my gaze. I looked at my family, a unified wall of judgment. They had already decided. I was the villain. Qley was the victim. They were the saviors. "Fine," I lied. "I need a few days to process this. I'd like to meet him. If he's my son, I want to do this right." The tension broke. My mom hugged me. Sarah gave me a curt nod of approval. Greg smirked. "Good choice, buddy. Welcome to fatherhood." I met Leo 2 days later at a park. Qley brought him. He was a sweet kid, obsessed with dinosaurs. I bought him an ice cream cone. I watched him run around the playground, feeling a strange mix of pity and detachment. I felt bad for him. He was being used as a pawn in a con. Because despite the gaslighting, despite the timeline fitting, my gut was screaming no. I am a structural engineer. I deal in loads, physics, and absolutes. People lie. Math doesn't. And I remembered something specific about our breakup. Qley had started acting distant and weird about 2 weeks before we officially split. While Leo was distracted eating his chocolate cone, I pulled a clean handkerchief from my pocket. "You got some on your chin, buddy," I said, wiping his face. I was careful. I got a good amount of saliva on the cloth. I put it in a Ziploc bag the second I turned my back. Thanks for being nice to him, Qley said as we walked to her car. I know this is a shock, but the back child support. My lawyer says we should ask for around $60,000 for the past 5 years, plus monthly going forward. $60,000, I repeated. It's fair, Mark. You make good money. Greg said you just got promoted. Greg told you that? She froze for a millisecond. Sarah mentioned it. When I called them. Right? I went straight to a private lab. I didn't use a drugstore kit. I paid for the Rush legal grade analysis. I swabbed my own cheek and handed over the handkerchief. The results came back in 48 hours. Probability of paternity, 0%. I stared at the paper in my car. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by a cold, hard rage. They had tried to trap me. My parents were ready to disown me. My sister called me a deadbeat, and Qley was trying to extort 6 figures. I could have just emailed the PDF to the family group chat and walked away. But then I remembered Greg. If it were me, I'd step up. That's what men do. And I remembered Qley's slip-up. Greg said you just got promoted. And I remembered the timeline again. 6 years ago. I was dating Qley. Sarah and Greg had been married for 2 years. Sarah was pregnant with their first daughter, Emily, at that exact time. She had been on bed rest for the last trimester. Greg had been working late a lot. And Greg had been the one who introduced me to Qley at a bar. Friend of a friend, he'd said. I looked at Leo's photo again. Sandy hair. Square jaw. Greg had sandy hair. Greg had a square jaw. I needed one more sample. The following Sunday, my parents hosted a welcome to the family barbecue for Leo. It was nauseating. My mom had bought toys. Sarah was acting like the benevolent aunt, hovering over Leo. Greg was manning the grill, holding a beer, playing the patriarch. So, Greg said loud enough for everyone to hear as I walked up. Did you bring the checkbook? Qley needs to put a deposit down on that new apartment. I'm working on the asset transfer, I said calmly. I want to make sure Leo is set for life. That's the spirit, Greg said, clapping me on the back. He took a swig of his beer and set the bottle down on the side table to flip a burger. When he turned back to the grill, I palmed the beer bottle. I walked inside, went to the bathroom, poured out the rest of the beer, and bagged the bottle. I left 10 minutes later, claiming a work emergency. I sent the bottle to the same lab. I asked for a kinship test, specifically a sibling or avuncular test against Leo's sample, which they still had on file. But since I suspected Greg was the father, I paid extra for a direct paternity comparison between sample A, Greg, and sample B, Leo. The email pinged 3 days later. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. The world stopped spinning for a second. It wasn't just a scam. It was a Greek tragedy. Greg had slept with my girlfriend while his wife, my sister, was on bed rest carrying their child. Qley had passed the baby off as mine because I was the single, unattached patsy, and Greg was the wealthy brother-in-law she couldn't touch without blowing up her friendship with the family. And Greg had pushed for me to accept the kid. Why? To keep his secret close? To assuage his guilt by having his son raised by his brother-in-law? Or maybe he just enjoyed the power trip. I didn't just want to expose them. I wanted to nuke the site from orbit. I called a lawyer friend of mine. We drafted a document. It wasn't a real legal filing, but it looked like one. Then I texted the family group chat. I've made a decision. I'm ready to sign everything and hand over the check. Dinner at Mom and Dad's. Tuesday. Everyone needs to be there. Tuesday night. The atmosphere was celebratory. My mom had made lasagna. Qley looked relieved, almost happy. She probably saw her debts vanishing. Sarah was beaming at me. I knew you'd do the right thing, Mark. I'm proud of you. Yeah, Greg said, pouring wine. Let's get the paperwork done so we can eat. I placed my briefcase on the table. I agree. Let's get the paperwork done. I pulled out a thick stack of papers. Qley, I said, I've prepared a trust fund for Leo. Full tuition, medical, everything. But before I sign, I need full transparency. No secrets in this family. Right, Sarah? Absolutely, Sarah said. Great. I pulled out the first document. This is the paternity test I ran last week using Leo's DNA. The room went dead silent. Qley's face drained of color. She started to stand up. You tested him without my permission. I tested him to confirm I was the father, I said. And guess what? I'm not. My mother gasped. What? But the resemblance. Probability 0, I said, tossing the results in front of my father. I am not Leo's father. Then who is? Sarah asked, her voice sharp. She turned to Qley. You lied to us? You brought this child into our home and lied. Wait, I said. She didn't lie about everything. She said the father was in this room. Greg stopped chewing. He looked at me, and for the first time in his life, the arrogance was gone. It was replaced by pure, unadulterated fear. Mark, Greg said, his voice a warning growl. Don't what? I asked innocently. Don't find the truth? You told me to man up, Greg. You told me to take responsibility. So I decided to find out who really needs to take responsibility. I pulled out the second document, the one with the colorful charts from the lab. I noticed Leo looked a lot like the family, just not my side of the genetics. So I tested a second sample. From a beer bottle someone left at the barbecue. I slid the paper across the table to Sarah. Sarah, meet the father. Sarah picked up the paper. Her eyes scanned the lines. Her hands started to shake. She looked at the name at the top of the sample column. Gregory T. Miller. She looked at Leo, who was playing with a toy car on the floor, oblivious. Then she looked at Qley. Then she looked at her husband. You, she whispered. The sound was more terrifying than a scream. You and her. Sarah. Baby, listen. It's not what it looks like, Greg stammered, standing up. These online tests are garbage. Mark is rigging this. It's a certified lab, Greg, I said coldly. And the timeline? 5 years and 9 months ago? While Sarah was on bed rest with Emily, my father stood up. He's a quiet man, usually, but he walked over to Greg and punched him in the face. It wasn't a cinematic punch. It was clumsy, but it knocked Greg back into the china cabinet. Plates shattered. Chaos erupted. Qley grabbed Leo and bolted out the front door without a word. Greg was trying to explain, holding his bleeding nose. Sarah was screaming, a guttural, animalistic sound of pure heartbreak. My mother was sobbing. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and picked up my briefcase. Where are you going? My dad asked, breathing heavy, looking at the wreckage of his dining room. Home, I said. I'm not a father. This looks like a family matter for the Millers. I walked out. The fallout lasted for months. Sarah filed for divorce the next morning. With the proof of infidelity and a paternity test that proved he had a secret child, she took Greg to the cleaners. She got the house, primary custody of their kids, and a massive chunk of his 401k. Greg lost his job. Apparently, his company had a strict morality clause for executives, and when the scandal became public during the divorce proceedings, including the part where he tried to trick his brother-in-law into paying for his bastard child, they cut him loose to save face. He moved into a shoddy apartment complex 3 towns over. Qley tried to sue Greg for child support, but since he was now unemployed and paying massive alimony to Sarah, she was getting pennies on the dollar compared to what she would have gotten from me. Last I heard, she was working double shifts at a diner. My parents apologized. It was awkward. They came to my apartment a week later. My dad couldn't look me in the eye. We should have trusted you, my mom said. We were just so desperate for it to be true. I know, I said. But you were ready to sacrifice me for a lie. That takes a long time to fix. We're on speaking terms, but Sunday dinners are canceled indefinitely. A few months later, I ran into Greg at a gas station. He looked terrible. He'd gained 20 pounds, and his Tesla was replaced by a beat-up Honda Civic. He saw me pumping gas and hesitated. You ruined my life, you know that? He spat out. You could have just paid. You have plenty of money. You blew up everything just to save a few bucks. I finished pumping, screwed the cap back on, and looked at him. I didn't ruin your life, Greg. You ruined it 6 years ago when you cheated on my pregnant sister. And then you ruined it again when you tried to make me pay for your sins. I just turned on the lights. I got in my car and drove away. The rearview mirror showed him standing alone under the fluorescent lights, fading into the distance. It was the best view I'd seen in years.